In the dry and forgotten heart of the South, where the wind drags loneliness and the trees have given up their leaves, lives Don Fermin, a man as hard as the dust of the plains. His imposing figure, upright back and wide-brimmed hat, rides through the town as if the world belonged to him. He does not greet, he does not thank, he does not believe. Faith, to him, is weakness. God doesn't give harvests, men with guts do, he spits with contempt. No one dares correct him, not even the old priest of the village. He rejects mass, prayers, and pleas. His ranch, large and lonely, reflects his inner world, dry, isolated, and without tenderness. The community fears him, but also pities him. Behind his arrogance lies a void as vast as the fields that never bloom. His disdain for faith is not just ideological, it's visceral. Don Fermin has built his life on the belief that he needs no one, not even God. His pride gallops faster than his black horse, announcing his inevitable fall. One cloudy morning, with the sky heavy with warnings, Don Fermin decided to challenge nature. He ignored the peasants' pleas not to climb the hill of the knife after the storm. Only cowards fear wet ground, he said, laughing with disdain. He mounted his horse and galloped uphill, dragging his pride like a banner. But the earth, which remains silent, also waits for its moment. At the summit, one loose stone was enough for the horse to slip. A sharp neigh, a body in the air, and then the dry thud. Don Fermin rolled down like a dry branch. His back broke against a hidden rock. The wind stopped. He could no longer stand. He lay still, without strength or control, just a shadow of the man he once was. When they found him, his eyes were blank and his hands hung useless. The diagnosis was cruel and direct. He would never walk again. But what truly began to break was not his bones, it was his soul. Pride had finally fallen from the horse. From that day on, Don Fermin no longer rode. Seated in an old wheelchair, he spent his afternoons beneath the dry tree in the plaza, where he once never lingered. His hunched back replaced his arrogance, and his shadow, now longer than his pride, accompanied him in silence. The town that once bowed their heads at his passing now avoided him, not out of fear, but out of pity. And that hurt more. The compassion of others pierced like thorns. No one feared him anymore. No one admired him. Only the children, with their clean eyes, dared look at him, like one looks at a wounded lion. Don Fermin tried to maintain his posture, shouted bitterly, insulted those who passed, but his voice no longer imposed. It was hoarse, hollow, defeated. The respect he once commanded had vanished. And in that dusty square, surrounded by murmurs and absence, he began to feel for the first time the weight of his solitude. A solitude not born of being alone, but of no longer being seen. There, in that silent abandonment, his soul began to look in the mirror. And he didn't like what he saw. One ordinary afternoon, as he muttered anger through clenched teeth, a boy of about 10 stood before Don Fermin. Barefoot, with patched clothes and wind-tousled hair, he had something that clashed with his poverty. A serene, deep, almost luminous gaze. "May I help you cross?" he asked firmly, without fear. Don Fermin looked at him with disdain, scoffed, but the boy did not move. He was not offended. He did not argue. He simply smiled with sweetness. "It's not pity, it's that I can help you walk again. In another way," he said. Fermin let out a bitter laugh. "What do you know, kid?" But the boy, unfazed, whispered a phrase that stuck in him like a splinter. "It's your heart that has fallen." It was as if time stopped. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had pointed out the invisible. That night, for the first time, Don Fermin couldn't sleep. He closed his eyes and saw that clean gaze and soft voice. He didn't know it yet, but that child was not ordinary. He was presence. He was seed. He was God, knocking from within. Since that encounter, the boy's phrase pounded Don Fermin's mind like distant thunder. "It's your heart that has fallen." He tried to forget it, told himself it was just a meddling kid, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw him, calm, standing, unshakable in his tenderness. Nights grew long, sleep scarce, food tasteless. It wasn't physical pain eating at him, It was something deeper, a hunger for meaning, a thirst for something he couldn't name. Then, one silent dawn, it happened. Lying in his cot, soul in turmoil, he felt something strange. A slight tingling in his numb feet, a barely perceptible tremor, like a blade of life pushing through dry soil. He swallowed hard, thought he imagined it, but no. It was there. It wasn't strength. It wasn't healing. It was possibility. He closed his eyes, not to escape this time, but to feel. And for the first time in his life, Don Fermin cried without pride. Tears that didn't hurt, but cleansed. Tears that cracked the stone armor. The miracle hadn't yet touched his legs, but it had begun in his soul. At dawn, not fully knowing why, Don Fermin asked to be taken to the plaza. The breeze was warm, the dust danced as if it sensed what was about to happen. And there was the boy, seated on the same stone, as if time itself had been waiting. Fermin didn't growl or pretend strength. He simply lowered his head. The boy approached with a gentle hand and asked, "Are you ready?" He didn't answer, because you're never really ready to break open inside. The boy knelt before him and began to pray, not with elaborate words, but with his soul. The world seemed to pause. Then, something rose from Don Fermin's feet. It wasn't fire. It was life. He gripped the arms of the chair, his body screamed, but something stronger held him. Faith. He moved one foot, just a little, but it moved. And with that spark, the sacred fire ignited. He stood up, not with strength but with soul. He fell to his knees, not from weakness, but from surrender. And without speaking, he prayed, with tears instead of words. Because true humility isn't shouted, it's lived. Don Fermin's miracle did not happen in solitude. When he knelt, soul shattered but free, the whole town gathered around in silence. No one spoke. No one interrupted. It was as if that moment belonged to everyone. Women wept quietly, elders trembled, children held hands. In that humble gesture, in that heart finally opened, each person saw their own longing for redemption. Don Fermin raised his gaze and said one trembling word. "Forgive me." A small word that carried years of harshness, pride, and distance. A woman stepped forward, the same one he once mocked for praying in the plaza. She knelt before him, took his hands and whispered, "We were waiting for you." Then everyone fell to their knees. Not for him, but for what he symbolized. And the boy, with eyes no longer of this world, leaned in and said, "I just came to remind you that God never gives up on anyone." That day, in Palmer de Abajo, not just a man stood up. An entire town did. From that moment when Don Fermin fell to his knees, something changed forever in Palmer de Abajo. It was no longer just the story of a man who walked again. It was the story of everyone who had ever broken inside. The faith he once despised was what finally lifted him. Not with violence, not with punishment, but with tenderness. Because that's how God acts. He waits in silence, touches instead of pushing, transforms instead of humiliating. And when a heart hardened by years finally opens, the miracle does not delay. Don Fermin learned that the true miracle was not using his legs again, but feeling again, trusting again, seeing others without arrogance. His life, once a monument to pride, became living testimony of what faith can do when it finds a crack to enter. Sometimes life breaks us not to destroy, but to teach us from the ground what we never saw from the top. It is never too late to ask for forgiveness. Never too late to change. Never too late to be reborn from within. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here we share stories that heal, that teach, that remind us there's always a new dawn for those willing to believe. Because even if we give up, God never does. And sometimes, all it takes is one seed of faith to bloom from the mud.